Thank you for viewing this American Sewing Guild educational series on how to create an overcast seam finish. An overcast seam finish is very similar to a zigzag seam finish. The only real difference is the type of machine stitch used. This seam finish may be used when the sewer does not have access to a serger or overcast machine. Choose a stitch type on the machine that will mimic an overlock type of stitch. This type of finish is good for light to heavyweight fabrics, firmly woven. It can be used on almost any type of garment except for sheer fabrics where the stitching would show through to the right side of the garment. Create a plain seam, meld the stitches, and then press open the seam allowance. Choose a stitch, such as this one, where there will be threads on each side of the zigzag pattern which will interlock. Begin with the default setting and test on a scrap of the project fabric. Adjust the stitch length and width if needed. This type of stitch, used for a single edge, will tend to make the edges curl. To prevent this, use a strip of tissue paper underneath to help stabilize the edge when sewing. Place the paper underneath a single seam allowance. The right swing of the needle should fall just over the edge of the fabric. Work carefully, sewing along the entire edge of the seam. The thread at the edge of the zigzag should form just at the cut edge of the fabric. After the entire edge of the seam allowance has been stitched, the tissue will be removed. The stitches perforate the paper for easy removal. Gently hold your right thumb over the stitches and then carefully tear the paper away, not against the stitches, but against your thumb. You can see the paper tears away easily from the edge. Repeat for the other side of the stitch line. Any remaining paper underneath the stitches will eventually dissolve away as the garment is laundered and worn. Instead of tissue paper, water-soluble embroidery stabilizer can be used. When using this product, be sure the fabric can be washed, as this is how the stabilizer is removed. Just cut a length of stabilizer and place behind the seam allowance. Stitch along the edge of the seam allowance. The stabilizer will help keep the stitches from curling the cut edge of the fabric. The seam edge is finished, and now the stabilizer can be removed. Instead of ripping like the paper, cut the excess stabilizer away from the stitching lines. Be careful not to cut into any of the stitching lines. Repeat on the other edge of the seam allowance. Applique scissors are great for doing this simple task. The excess stabilizer has been cut away. Any remaining stabilizer underneath the stitching will wash away during the first laundering. Even though it is washed away, the edge will still remain flat. The seam allowance edges are neatly finished by using this technique. If you don't have a serger, try this stitch type for finishing the edges of a seam allowance on your garments. Thank you for viewing this American Sewing Guild video. If you have any questions, email Ramona@asg.org. The American Sewing Guild is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to people who believe sewing is a rewarding and creative activity. If you enjoyed this video, join ASG to view our library of in-depth educational videos on various sewing topics. They are free to members. Members also enjoy discounts from vendors who support our organization, along with many other benefits.